Hello, this is a makeup chapel on learning to think professionally in ministry. So this will be a little bit abbreviated. So let me get to the main point. When we think professionally in ministry, that means we are careful in what we do and in what we say. Thinking professionally means that we think carefully about things. People who don't think professionally are careless in what they say and in what they do, and they end up hurting people because of their recklessness, and they end up hurting themselves. So thinking professionally means giving thought, being reflective, not going off half-cocked, but thoughtfully pursuing anything that we do, thoughtfully saying things so that we are sure to bless and not to curse. When I was first married, my wife and I used cash. Wherever we went, we paid cash. We put our cash in envelopes in our house, and we had a box filled with envelopes, and those envelopes would say things like grocery or furniture or electric bills or whatever it is that we had to pay for. We had different envelopes for those categories, and we would put cash in those envelopes, and we would go into Walmart and we would pay cash. And if we had a $130 Walmart receipt, we would pay cash for that. And, people would sort of look at us funny because that wasn't very common, and it's not very common today, but we would pay cash for everything we would do, except at the gas station we would use a card because they had the card reader out there. But we would pay cash for everything. Now the reason we did that is when we were first married, somebody handed us the book Financial Peace by Dave Ramsey. We had no idea what to do with our money. We didn't know how to handle money. We didn't know who Dave Ramsey was, but somebody handed us this book, and we said, well, I guess he knows something about money. We'll just do what he says. He told us we should get some envelopes and stick cash in it and pay everything with cash. So that's what we did. We did that for the first 10 years of our marriage, paid everything with cash. We don't do that anymore. Today we use credit cards. It's easier. We get bonuses when we get 1.5% back on a Capital One card. We get Amazon points with an Amazon card. We have different credit cards, and we use credit cards to pay for everything we have now. We don't use cash for anything. For 10 years, we only used cash. Now we use credit cards. We learned for 10 years how to handle money. And using cash, we learned you don't spend more than what you have. When you're out of money in your envelope, you're out of money. And you wait for that envelope to get stuffed back up. We still have a budget, and we still keep up with what we spend in different categories. We just do it on a computer now. I keep up with virtual envelopes, you might call it. And so I check our credit card bills, I check our bank statements, and this came out of grocery, and this came out of furniture, and this came out of clothing. And I keep up with it, and I know how much we have to spend in each category. But we still are very careful with our money, and we never carry a balance on a credit card. Never have we carried a balance on a credit card. But we use credit cards because of the convenience. For 10 years, we only used cash. We learned how to be careful with our money. We learned the rules. And over the period of that 10 years, we learned some ways of maybe bending the rules a little bit, or learn when the rules are not so necessary as they may have at first seemed. And so I think we are continuing with the spirit of those principles we learned, and we continue to abide by them. We just do it in a little bit different way now. Thinking professionally in ministry can carry along some of the same lines. There are rules that you learn, and you abide by those rules until it becomes clear that you're in a context where those rules don't really matter or don't need to matter in the same way. When my first ministry job, the one that I actually got paid for, was as a college minister in Henderson, Tennessee, where I was in school. I was a college minister for a little church, and that meant I would go out there and teach class on Wednesdays and Sundays for the college kids. And I went out there on Wednesday nights, and I just wore what I always wore to go to church. On Wednesdays, I wore t-shirt and jeans. That's always what I did. And so when I started teaching this class, I wore t-shirt and jeans. One day an elder pulled me aside, and he, in a roundabout way, told me, stop wearing t-shirt and jeans. You need to step it up a notch. Well, I looked around and everybody else was wearing t-shirt and jeans, but I learned that I was not at that point like everybody else. I was employed by the church at this point a little bit. They paid me a little bit of money, but enough that they could dictate in some ways what I wore. So I started wearing slacks and a button-up shirt. I was in a context where that was important. And often, probably for most of us, we will be in contexts where what we wear reflects how much people perceive it as, how much we care about the position that we are in, and how much we care about God, and how much we care about the people that we're talking to. Not always. I think probably most of you have been in contexts, and I've certainly been in contexts, where wearing a suit, wearing a tie is completely inappropriate. When I go to the Philippines, I never wear a tie. When I go to Haiti, I never wear a tie. I get up and preach, and I preach in the Philippines, I preach in what they call a barong, which is sort of a fancy shirt. It's not tucked in, it's cool, and I look respectful, but I look respectful in a way that matches Filipino ethos and their style of clothing. We're in situations where maybe we learn certain rules and we need to abide by those rules until it is clear to us that those rules don't particularly, aren't going to get us very far, and we might need to adjust and change the rules. But the whole way, it's about being careful. The rules are there to teach us about being careful. We need to be careful. We need to be careful in the clothing that we wear. Really, that's just an illustration I'm using. I don't care so much about clothing, although it is something we need to give thought and attention to. But that is an illustration for all the other areas in ministry where we need to be careful. Relationships are fragile. The relationships you have in your house are fragile. The relationships you have with your wife or your kids, those relationships are fragile. One comment can damage that relationship. Well, certainly the relationships we have in a church are even more fragile. And so that makes it incumbent upon us to be careful in the way that we conduct ourselves and the way we speak before those people in our congregation and in our personal interactions. Communication is one of the keys to being careful in our relationships, to thinking professionally in our ministries. Communication is important for that. As leaders of the church, we need to communicate well with people, and that does not mean simply getting up in a pulpit and telling people what you think or what you think the Word of God is. It means soliciting, it also means soliciting from the people that we are supposed to care about what they think and what their feelings are. I'm in a part of a church right now where we are undergoing plans for a building expansion. And so our elders have been thinking about this and planning for this for several months now. We're going to expand the building. And one of the things they did that I love is that they went around to different classes in planning for this. They went around to different classes, and they did not, when they went to those different classes, tell the people, here's what we're going to do. They told the people, here's what we're thinking, Those are our ideas and thoughts, but we want to know if we were going to expand this place, if we were going to add on, if we're going to spend a bunch of money to do that and take several months to expand this building. What do you think it ought to include? How do you think it ought to go? Are you in favor of this idea at all? Give us your feedback, give us your thoughts. How can we serve you better? How can we serve our community better? What ideas have we not thought of that you have on your heart? They solicited that feedback. They didn't just get up in the pulpit and say, if anybody has any thoughts, come see us while we're in our elder study. They actively went and engaged with people and talked to them. Communication. People feel respected when you seek that feedback, when you seek that attention from them, their thoughts and ideas. People feel respected. We are in a business that is a part of a volunteer association. That is to say, people volunteer to come to church. They don't have to come. And we're not in a society anymore where there's a whole lot of societal pressure on people to be a part of a church somewhere. There's not hardly any at all pressure. So they just don't have to come if they don't feel respected. And so as church leaders, we need to be careful. Think professionally. We need to be careful with people and learn to show them respect. And part of showing them respect is communicating with them, not at them, but with them, seeking that interaction and soliciting that feedback. Paul said this very famous thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He said that to the Jew, I became as a Jew so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel. I can imagine that Paul wasn't equally comfortable in all of those situations. I can imagine that he would rather just live his life in one particular way and continue in that rather than changing sort of the way he eats or maybe the way he dresses or whatever it is that's involved in this idea that he talks about in 1 Corinthians 9. I can imagine that he wasn't particularly comfortable doing all this, but he did it, he says, for the sake of the gospel. He is, in a sense, thinking professionally. He is being careful in the way that he interacts with people, even when perhaps he doesn't particularly want to, he still does it. We need to remember our main goal is to connect people to God. And we think professionally in doing that when we don't put up needless roadblocks in that process. Needless roadblocks like comments that we say or things that we do or maybe clothes that we wear that prevent people from being able to connect to God through our ministry. Paul said, I do all things for the sake of the gospel. He's not going to put up any sort of hindrance as long as that's dependent on him. He's not going to put up any sort of hindrance to his mission of connecting people to God. And if we think professionally in our ministry, we will be careful to do the same thing.